Hi everyone. This is a story about how a husband was tied to a radiator and forced to watch his wife cheat on him. Please subscribe to the channel. It's no trouble for you, and it makes me happy. I had an affair. I cheated on my husband 3 times before my colleague, and I got careless and were exposed. He didn't catch us, fortunately. That would have broken him. Well, broken him even more. In the end, our marriage fell apart anyway, but at least he didn't witness it. No, we were exposed by a coworker, someone who was annoyed by our success and didn't hesitate to damage our reputations. It's not like I wanted this to happen. My therapist finally helped me understand that nothing happens for no reason. We make choices every day, and the consequences of those choices shape our entire lives. She taught me that choices are made even when we don't realize it. So yes, I had an affair. I wish I could say I was drunk or in some unstable state of mind, but the first time, I'd only had 3 glasses of wine. He was attractive, and we'd been lightly flirting for almost a year. We worked on the same team and often collaborated on projects. We even joked about being work spouses in front of our actual partners. Everyone laughed. My husband smiled and said, "All right. As her official work husband, I'm putting you in charge of all her shoe shopping expenses." His wife joined in on the joke too. "And I'm handing over responsibility for teaching him to put the toilet seat down. We expect reports." We all laughed and hugged before leaving. On the way home, my husband said how much he liked them and suggested inviting them into our social circle. They had recently moved and were looking to make friends. We really did have a lot of great evenings with them and our other friends. I won't go into details about appearances or anything too personal. That's not the point. We were young, active, fairly attractive, and let's leave it at that. I don't want to talk about the intimate details. My husband was 30, the others were in their late 20s. I had a good job. I got hired right after college and was building a career. I'd been promoted a few times, and the owner of the company, an older man, often said I was like the daughter he never had. I became a team leader, which sometimes required overnight business trips. I didn't love it, but my husband said it was okay. Usually I'd leave on Thursday and return Friday afternoon. We'd spend time together when I got back, but after a while, it became routine and everything changed. We weren't bored with each other, but things had become predictable. We dated for 8 months and lived together for nearly a year before getting married. We were married for 3.5 years. The affair started after a stressful workday. We had dinner together, drank some wine. The conversation unexpectedly turned to how we missed our spouses and how many plans we still had for the future. Someone, I don't remember who, said that going home was the best way to relieve stress. Then came some light teasing and touches, a continuation of our old flirtation. He joked that, since we were work spouses, maybe we should make up for what we were missing. I'll admit it, he was charming and had a way with words. That's what made him valuable to our team. We went to our separate rooms. I lay in bed thinking it all over. Soon, he knocked on my door with a bottle of wine and 2 glasses. We talked a little, but in the end, we crossed the line. The next morning, I woke up with a heavy feeling of guilt. I felt like I had let down my husband and everything I believed in. He looked miserable too. We barely spoke the entire next day. Even on the flight home, we sat apart. 2 weeks passed before he came into my office and closed the door. We talked. He apologized, and so did I. We agreed it would never happen again and promised to stay silent. That lasted 6 months. I thought it was all behind us. At one point, I was feeling overwhelmed, and my husband asked what was bothering me. After gathering myself a bit, I said it was work-related. He looked concerned, but believed me. "I'll ask H to keep an eye on you," he said. If it were his wife and I could help, I wouldn't just stand by either. 6 months later, Christmas came, and due to a snowstorm, my colleague and I got stuck in a northern city for 2 days. My husband called often, and once he told me that he and my colleague's wife were going to see a play I really wanted to see. He realized I was upset. "If you'd like, we won't go. I'll give her the tickets. Maybe she can go with her sister." I told him it was okay, but he'd have to make it up to me with a surprise next Christmas. He promised. My colleague and I chatted a bit. He joked that his wife now admired my husband. "She always says, 'Look how thoughtful he is.' It must be nice to be treated with that kind of respect." Did I tell you about the elegant necklace he bought her just because he saw it and thought it would suit her? I absent-mindedly played with the necklace, smiling at the joy it brought me. It was a complete surprise, not for my birthday, not for Christmas, just because a graceful neck like yours deserves this. It will highlight your style and elegance. He wasn't perfect. He had small flaws that endlessly irritated me. But then I'd look at other couples in our circle, see how women envied me, and how men either admired him or were annoyed by him because he set such a high standard. In those moments, I would simply smile and squeeze his hand tighter. In the end, we spent 2 full days alone together. We were still together when the call came to my room, saying the airport had reopened and we could fly home. We took a shower, boarded the plane, and swore that, even though we had felt good together, it would never happen again. For months later, we were exposed. I know you want the details. Yes, we were young, healthy, and spent time like grown-ups do. Was it worth the consequences? No. Without getting into the specifics, I'll just say the consequences were serious. My boss called us both in separately. When he saw me, he nearly cried. "I can't even begin to tell you how disappointed I am in you. You were the best of the best. I always admired your marriage. I thought it was a lot like mine when my wife and I first started out. Do you still have a husband?" I nodded, unable to hide my tears. Yes, I was still married, though I hadn't seen my husband in 2 weeks. All right. He was a good man. I hope, deep down, he can forgive you. But I have to protect this company. You're staying on, but your days as a team leader are over. You won't represent us at any off-site or public events again. Do you understand? I nodded, grateful that I still had a job. But I knew my future at that company was over. Sooner or later, I'd have to update my resume and hope he'd give me a decent reference. Things were worse for H. He left quietly in exchange for a recommendation. I'm sure it was neutral. Mr. X has excellent communication skills, works well in a team, but I knew that if any of my boss's friends wanted to hire him, there would be an unspoken no. I truly believed that if we'd just talked, we would have apologized to each other. But we didn't. Everything was decided without us. My husband, who had never spoken a harsh word before, told H directly that if he ever found him, he'd better hope he didn't survive the meeting. H believed him and moved far away as soon as his divorce was finalized. He left behind a devastated wife and a 5-year-old son. I think it took her years to recover. 8 years passed before she remarried to an older man who took care of her and her child. He asked the boy what kind of car he wanted when he turned 16 and was moved to tears when the boy said what he wanted most was to take his last name. Just like that, H was erased from his life forever. My life suddenly split into 2 phases, before the affair and after. The before was full of light, the after was gray and heavy. Thankfully, it didn't last forever. Then came the time to choose sides. Our close-knit circle fell apart, and people had to decide who they'd stay in touch with. Casual jokes and hints vanished. Everyone was afraid of stirring up painful memories. I was even glad when we sold the house and separated. The women supported me but kept their distance. They knew I had already ruined one marriage and didn't want to take any risks. Things were worse for H. The men didn't trust him and wouldn't let him near their wives. My husband and H's wife got the most sympathy. After all, they were the ones who suffered the most. Then came the time to tell parents, friends, and relatives. I had let down both families, but they forgave me, even though the marriage didn't survive. I still send cards and gifts to his parents. They reply, and a few years later even invited me to visit if I were ever in town. I didn't go, but I thanked them for their kindness. Perhaps the first casualty after the affair was our intimacy. We tried to reconnect, but it was difficult. 3 weeks passed before my husband came home, and another 6 before we dared to attempt rebuilding our relationship. But one day, I had my friend tie my husband to the radiator so he would watch me cheat on him. It was a disaster. We were both afraid he of not being enough, and I of doing something wrong. With time, things got a little better. We tried to maintain closeness, but at some point I noticed him pulling away. At first, I understood. Then I started to feel hurt. Couldn't he see how hard I was trying? We went to couples therapy, and it helped us realize that the relationship couldn't be repaired. I had broken the trust, and no matter how much I tried, the wound was too deep. 1.5 years later, we got divorced. It was peaceful, and we split everything equally. I didn't even cry when the papers came. We still saw each other occasionally since we lived in the same city. We always exchanged polite greetings, but nothing more. I remember once seeing him at a cafe with another woman. She was smiling, sitting close. I realized he had a new life. When I got home, I cried for the last time. After sending out my resume, I got a job offer in another state. It was a step forward and exactly what I needed. I said goodbye to my friends, kissed my parents, and moved on. I thought about the counselor I'd seen for a few months after the divorce. She really helped me. Not because she pitied or blamed me, but mostly because she just listened. In our second-to-last session, she surprised me by pulling her blouse from her skirt and slightly lowering it. On the side of her hip was a fairly large scar. She adjusted her clothes and sighed. We were young, 16 or 17, and my friend asked her older brother to get us alcohol. It was mostly liqueur, so we got drunk quickly. We went deep into the woods so no one could see us and built a fire when it got dark. It wasn't very big, and one thing led to another and then to dares, and one boy jumped over the fire. Soon, we were all egging each other on, and it was working. I was on my 5th jump when I stumbled and fell sideways into the coals. I spent 3 weeks in the hospital, and the scar never went away. After graduating, I realized that jumping through fire had been a conscious decision. The more I did it, the easier it became, until I grew careless. This scar is my price. What I'm trying to say is, you made a conscious choice to enter into a relationship outside your marriage, and when nothing happened, when you realized you might get away with it, you did it again and again until you were caught. She paused briefly before continuing. You kept doing it until you got careless and got caught. Do you understand? You can't chalk it up to just one slip. Your choice to continue meant that, even though you jumped over the fire a few times and felt safe, in the end, you stumbled and fell. The scars you carry are on the inside, and they'll never completely disappear, but they will fade. And the next time you have to make a choice, don't forget to scratch your scars. I thought about it a lot that following week before I admitted she was right. I could have blamed everything on H. He showed up at my door, but he didn't force me to let him in. Everything that happened after was mutual. Every time after that was simply my choice. And so, here I am, divorced for 4 years. Through family, I learned that my ex-husband had found someone else. They had been married a year and had a son. I started dating about 6 months after the divorce, but never felt a spark with anyone. I'll admit, sometimes I got close to someone just to escape the loneliness. But every time the last one left, I'd lie in bed, looking back at my life, and realize I had to let go of the past if I ever wanted to be happy again. I stopped going to bars and loud parties. I joined a gym, got involved in community events. Once I got in shape, I started running 5 Burmese chots and 10 Burmese chots. I never placed in the top 10, but I made a lot of friends. One of my running buddies and I got along so well that we began training together regularly. Then it was coffee after runs. Then lunch. Then dinner. We dated for 4 months before becoming intimate. He was so attentive and caring that I cried afterward. For months later, we were still together, and I decided to tell him why I wasn't married. I wanted him to see who I used to be and who I was now. I assured him I had been faithful to him since our first date, and that the mistakes I'd made were just that, mistakes. Ones I didn't intend to repeat. What I didn't know was that he'd also been married once. He divorced his wife after learning she had cheated. For him, once a cheater, always a cheater was etched in stone. Our relationship ended. I mourned for a while, but then I moved on. The following year, I learned that God really does forgive our mistakes. And more importantly, I found someone who could forgive mine. He was 7 years older than me, but lean and fit. We met at a race and crossed the finish line at the exact same time. I was so elated I did a victory dance, lost my footing on uneven pavement, ran into him, and we both fell. Instead of being upset, he laughed. I tried to apologize, but he smiled kindly. You know, if you wanted my attention, a smile would have done. Tackling me's a bit much. Still, I'll forgive you. Over dinner. Tomorrow night. Hope you like French cuisine. He pulled a business card from his sports bag. Call me and let me know what time works for you. It's a bit of a high-end place, so wear a nice dress. I was still trying to string words together when he waved goodbye and walked off. My running buddy burst into hysterics. Well, that didn't take long, huh? If I'd known knocking a guy over could get his attention, I'd have done it ages ago. Good for you, girl. You do know he's ranked number 4 in the city's most eligible bachelors, right? No? Well, good luck. The restaurant lived up to its name. He was dressed casually, but everything was clearly expensive, and his tie was pure silk. I wore my best dress, something I'd found on deep discount because the hem was torn. Sewing was one of my hobbies, so I fixed it by trimming and raising the hem a little over an inch. I thought it showed off my legs nicely, and judging by the way he looked at them, I was right. The date went well, as did the next, and the next. Over 8 months, we grew closer. He was fit, attractive, and I felt emotions I hadn't felt in a long time. It was more than affection, it was turning into love. I hadn't been this happy in years. It broke my heart, but I was honest with him. He listened, handed me tissues, and held me while I cried. I tried to read his face, it seemed, a bit surprised. I'll understand if you don't want to see me again. But I want you to know I have strong feelings for you. And if you choose to keep seeing me, if this relationship becomes serious, I'm ready to accept any terms if it gives us a chance. He gently held me. I know about your past. Yes, I looked into it a bit. I was just very curious, couldn't understand how someone so smart and kind was still single. You made a mistake, but you took responsibility for it. That means a lot to me. He stood, walked to his home office, and came back with a small box and a large envelope. He handed me the envelope. Read this. If you agree with it, open the box. I read the document twice before asking for a pen. I signed all the indicated spots and gave it back. I had just agreed to a 20-year commitment to honesty and loyalty. The document had only one condition: to remain faithful and dependable. With trembling hands, I opened the box and burst into tears as I slipped the ring onto my finger. That was the beginning of a new era, one filled with happiness and meaning. I didn't think I deserved it, but I learned to value trust and do everything I could to protect it. Not long ago, I returned to my hometown for a class reunion and found myself in the company of my ex-husband and his wife. It was awkward at first, it had been 15 years. But eventually we spoke openly. I apologized one final time. He said he had long forgiven me, because carrying anger and pain had become unbearable. I told him it had taken me years to forgive myself, but I finally had. We spent the rest of the evening chatting and showing off photos of our kids. I had 2 girls. They had 3 boys. And that's the moral of this story. Sometimes, good people do stupid things. Even if they didn't mean to, even if they were never caught, it stays with them for life. That inner voice always whispers, "What if today is the day it all comes out?" I was too confident, naively believed that if I were caught, I'd be understood and forgiven. As you can see, that's not how it works. I keep a close eye on my girls, and when they're older, I'll tell them about my past. I hope they'll understand and learn from it. And I'll tell them the story about scars. That's all. My therapist was right. I feel relieved having told the truth. Thank you for reading. If my story helps someone avoid a similar mistake, then it was worth it. If not, that's their choice. Just ask yourself, can you live with the scars that may follow?